Hey, vinyl community and Beatle fans. Wanted to do a quick video here and talk about one of the peripheral participants in the Get Back sessions, the Get Back film. I'm talking about Mal Evans, and Mal Evans is actually one of the first people that you see after the beginning montage, kind of giving you the history leading up to the Get Back sessions. He's carrying in Ringo's drum head. He's kind of helped setting up the studio at the beginning of the film. Throughout the course of the movie, you see him doing various activities. He's the one who brings the anvil and bangs the anvil during the Maxwell Silver Hammer rehearsals. You see him fetching different things for the Beatles. He was kind of their personal assistant in those days, and so he was kind of at their beck and call. But you see him hovering around throughout the Twickenham sessions, throughout the sessions at the Apple Studios, on the rooftop. He's always there. He's kind of a huge lumbering guy with glasses. But he's got a pretty interesting history with the Beatles that goes all the way back to 1962. He was actually a friend of George Harrison's. George Harrison recommended him as a doorman and a bouncer for the Cavern Club. So he worked in the Cavern Club in the early days. He did some work as a roadie and bodyguard for the Beatles during their touring years. So he's kind of a central character, one of the most central characters in the history of the Beatles. He actually appears in 4 of the Beatles' 5 films. He's in A Hard Day's Night. You see him briefly in the scene where John and the woman, she mistakes him for somebody else. She thinks he's somebody, another famous actor, and he's just kind of playing along with it. You see Mal Evans carrying a stand-up bass very quickly in that scene. In the movie Help, he's the swimmer who pops up through the ice when they're in the Austrian Alps. He's the channel swimmer, and he's there. He's kind of disoriented, but he's in that scene of the movie. In Magical Mystery Tour, you see him on the bus, but he's also one of the magicians in the magician scene. And of course, he's in the Let It Be film throughout the course of that film. But in the course of his duties as a road manager for the Beatles, one of the more interesting incidents that happened with Mal was in the Philippines. The Beatles had unintentionally snubbed Imelda Marcos, who was the first lady, and they were treated very harshly at that point. The police were kind of jostling them from place to place, and then as they were making their leave to get on the plane to leave Manila, these policemen came on board the plane and ordered Mal Evans and Neil Aspinall both off the plane. And Mal Evans actually thought that they were going to be executed. And fortunately, they just made them cough up whatever money they had on hand as kind of extortion before they would let the Beatles leave the Philippines. So that's a whole story in and of itself. You can read about that in any Beatles biography. But anyway, Mal Evans was kind of in the middle of all that. During the Sgt. Pepper sessions, Mal Evans actually helped co-write Fixing a Hole with Paul McCartney, even though he was not credited and did not receive any royalties, much to his disappointment. But the Lennon-McCartney credit, as he said, was just a little too powerful. He was never going to get a third credit on a Beatles recording. And he pretty much kept the same salary, 38 pounds a week, throughout his entire employment with the Beatles. And he always had money problems as a result. And it's a little disappointing that he never got a raise from the Beatles, even though the money continued to roll in. They continued to keep him at the same rate of pay as he did when he started as their roadie in the early 60s. So he had a lot of money problems as a result. There's a story where he had to go and actually ask George Harrison for money because he was broke. But he devoted his entire life to the Beatles, and he was always there when they needed somebody to go scope out a location or to go, do anything. Mal Evans would be the person that they would call on and kind of dispatch him to wherever they needed him to go to do whatever they needed him to do. And so after the Beatles broke up, he was kind of a lost soul. He discovered the group Badfinger, actually, when they were called the Ivies originally, and he brought them to the Beatles' attention, who, of course, signed them to Apple Records, and they went on to have a pretty significant career, but Mal Evans was the one who discovered them. But after the Beatles broke up, he was kind of a lost soul, and was doing some work here and there, but just was still struggling financially. And in 1976, he had started to get into some drugs, and he was writing a autobiography about his time with the Beatles, and his co-author for the book that he was writing traveled with him to Los Angeles, and Mal Evans was kind of in a despondent state. He was having money issues, he was taking a lot of drugs, and he was in a hotel, and he had kind of barricaded himself in this hotel room. He was kind of disoriented, groggy, incoherent, not making a lot of sense. And so the co-writer for his biography was concerned enough and called the police. And Mal Evans had this air rifle with him. And so when the police arrived, they confronted Mal Evans and told him to drop the rifle. They didn't realize it was an air rifle. And Mal Evans pointed the rifle at the LA police officers, and they shot him dead on the site. So it was very tragic the way that it ended. None of the Beatles actually attended his funeral, although George Martin did. But kind of disappointing again, none of the Beatles bothered to attend that funeral. And as it turned out, he was cremated and his ashes were actually lost in the mail for a time. And John Lennon joked that they were probably in the dead letter office. But at any rate, his ashes did end up getting recovered, but sort of the final indignity for Mal Evans at the end of his life. But just a real interesting character, present throughout Beatles' entire history. And he's very visible there in the Get Back movie. So just thought I would share that little bit of history about who is that guy and why is he there and what did he do and a little bit about him. So anyway, hope you've enjoyed the video and take care.